Well, welcome everyone. We might have a few people that show up a little bit late, and that's okay. And that's part of why we're recording, because there are 8 people that are registered for this class, for this workshop, and some of my students. So we'll just start with some introductions. My name is Dr. Freddie Giesler, and I am faculty here at ISU in the Sociology, Social Work, and Criminology Department. I'm social work faculty, and we have a telehealth, mental health project that we're doing with rural schools here in Idaho. And I have 4 students that I'm working with that are helping to implement that program. So we're providing mental health services to local Southeast Idaho rural school districts, to students and to staff. And we're just getting started. We have a number of schools that are part of the Include project, and we're working through our list to get memorandums of understanding and get everything in place so that we can work with students and staff. So part of that project is providing some mental health resources and training to teachers and to school staff in the area. So we have the series of 7 workshops that we're doing as part of this project. And my students are really going to be doing the bulk of the presentation, but I'm going to be here participating as well. But this is an opportunity for them to engage with all of you and to work on their presentation skills and to have a chance to kind of do a deep dive into some areas around mental health and rural schools. So Kaylee's going to take the lead on most of this today, but I will interject my 2 cents here and there. And like I said, we're going to record this so that if anyone is late or misses something, they'll still be able to complete the whole program. So Kaylee, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. As previously mentioned, my name is Kaylee Leach. I am a student in the Master's in Social Work program here at ISU, and I am in the Include 2 program as part of my internship. Just a little bit of background about me. I graduated with my bachelor's degree in psychology this past May, and I am now working towards my master's in an effort to become a licensed clinical social worker. I do have some previous social services experience as I used to work at Bannock House with the youth there. A little bit of background about Bannock House. It is an inpatient treatment center for youth. It's basically kind of like a group home. And I worked as a direct care staff there. So I would take the kids on transports, I would cook them dinner, do things like that, as well as provide emotional support when needed and help them to be able to use their coping skills and adhere to their safety plan when it called for it. So that's a little bit of background about me. We can jump into the presentation. So what is an ACE? Just to give you some background about the studies about ACEs and where they originated from. First off, ACEs stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. And these are potentially traumatic experiences that happened from the time a child is born up until they are 17, so up until they're kind of considered to be a legal adult. The original ACE study that was first conducted was done by Kaiser and the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, from 1995 to 1997 with a couple ways of data collection. They had over 17,000 participants, and basically they would go over physical exams with them and do confidential surveys with them regarding their childhood experiences, as well as the current health and status, their current health status and behaviors that they're exhibiting. So they would kind of take a lot of different factors into account, looking at their health as well as what adverse childhood experiences that they had when they were in their youth. So some different examples of ACEs include emotional abuse, physical abuse, and sexual abuse. I think those are ones that we most commonly think of as ACEs because those have terrible consequences on people's lasting mental well-being. Some other ones can include physical neglect as well as emotional neglect. Any amount of household dysfunction. So if there's mental illness in the household, a relative has been incarcerated, if the mother is treated violently, any amount of substance abuse, divorce are all things that are counted as ACEs because they can have a negative impact on a child's health and well-being. Some other examples that are included in this little infographic include not having enough food in the home or experiencing any type of homelessness, as well as other adversity that can come from the community can have a lasting impact. So if a child is bullied, if they experience discrimination, if there are natural disasters in the area, if they witness and or experience acts of terrorism, refugee or wartime experiences, things like that, those can also have negative and lasting impacts, just as these other things can. One thing that I did want to touch on, as there have been other studies that have been conducted, I think a lot of times when we think of abuse, we think primarily of physical abuse, which is definitely harmful and long lasting. But I need to look at how emotional and verbal abuse, they've done studies, can be just as bad as physical abuse because it has negative impacts on a child's sense of self-esteem and emotional well-being. So I really want to focus on that as well. That emotional and verbal abuse are just as damaging as physical abuse. The CDC has a definition for an ACE that I really wanted to point out because I think this list is not all encompassing. There are a lot of different things that could be counted as an ACE for a child. The CDC says that anything that undermines a child's sense of safety, belonging, or stability can be counted as an ACE because these are things that affect a child's development as well as their emotional and mental well-being, the physical well-being, how they interact with others. So that was something that I wanted to point out. If something undermines a child's sense of safety, belonging, or stability, then that can be counted as an ACE because it has a lasting impact on their overall well-being. So I'll turn it over to Freddie for this side.
Okay. I think probably we know this maybe intuitively, especially if your teachers working with a wide range of students in your classroom. But it's pretty surprising the breadth of prevalence of adverse childhood experiences. So about 2/3 of the US population has experienced at least one type of ACE before they reached age 17. And even experiencing one ACE can have lasting impact. Where we see the most challenges for children going into adulthood is when you experience 4 or more ACEs. And that is true in 1 in 6, or just over 17% of the population. If you want to get more information about ACEs, it's really readily available on the CDC's website if you want to take a deep dive into some of those statistics. And we're going to cover quite a few of the risk factors and issues right here. But I think the take-home point here is that ACEs are quite prevalent. They're quite pervasive amongst the people that we meet in all of our different aspects of living. So the students that you're working with in your classroom, your fellow colleagues, your friends and family, your neighbors. They've all experienced some kind of adverse childhood experience. Sometimes, and we'll talk about this, people learn to cope effectively with those experiences, and other times that's not the case. So we want you to be prepared to help people to develop skills to be able to cope effectively. I think the one thing to note about this original study, so it's possible that the prevalence could actually be underreported, is that the research participants were fairly highly educated, and we know that education is a protective factor in the long run against the negative outcomes. So this is something to kind of keep in mind from this study, that we may in some areas see higher prevalences than 2/3. All right, you want to go on to the next one?
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for that. Yeah, so kind of like what Freddie was saying, there could be higher prevalence rates in different demographics. So from this PowerPoint, we can see this infographic has different groups that are more likely to have experienced ACEs versus other groups. And they're more likely to have experienced a significant amount of ACEs too. So they're more likely to have experienced the 4 or more ACEs that can have a strong negative impact on overall well-being. These populations can include those with less than a high school education, as Freddie was talking about, that affects a lot of different things like financial ability later on in life. Which brings us to our next group is people who make less than $15,000 a year, those with low socioeconomic status. Those who are unemployed or unable to work have experienced more ACEs and are more likely to. Different groups that experienced high rates of discrimination, like members who are multiracial, those who are indigenous, members of the LGBTQ plus community. These populations are exposed to further stress due to ACEs because of the historical and ongoing traumas that they've experienced because of systemic racism or discrimination. Not only that, but the impact of poverty from limited educational and economic opportunities can have a huge impact on them as well. So just going over some of these different groups and showing the negative and lasting impacts that this can have. I think we've kind of talked a little bit about the cycle that this can have too. Obviously, an ACE can be any financial struggle in a family. So if one person struggled with a lot of ACEs and attained less than high school education, went on to make less than 15,000 a year, and they had kids, then this affects their kids as well. Their kids have that ACE of growing up in poverty, and then it's just this cycle that kind of keeps on going. With these different groups that we've laid out, I kind of wanted to open this up to a discussion for you guys. And I wanted to ask you, what kind of differences do you see in your classrooms in regards to these different populations? Do you see differences with the many students that come in based on what groups they're in? I'm good if you want to like raise your hand, if you know how to raise your hand. If not, you can just shout it out.
I think I definitely this tracks with my experience with my populations here at the high school, but I will say that I've been surprised by high ACEs numbers with what you would consider to be privileged, my privileged population as well. It's really I've been surprised that it's non-discriminatory in some ways, that these tragedies affect everybody.
Absolutely. Thanks for sharing that. I think that's what Freddie touched on a little bit too, is this isn't discriminatory, like you said. I like that you pointed out this can be our neighbors, this can be friends, this can be family members. Everybody in different populations can experience these high rates. So thank you for sharing your experience. Is there anybody else that has anything? If not, that's okay. So we can move on to the next slide. This one really goes over the why an increased amount of ACEs can lead to negative long-term effects. So to start off, so an increase in ACEs leads to what we call toxic stress. So toxic stress is basically when there are prolonged amount of adrenaline and cortisol that run through your body. So kids who are in these, who continuously experience these traumatic experiences, their body is going to react to that in a physical way. The body is going to release these hormones that historically have protected people in the past. It gets your heart racing, gets your blood pressure up, gets you to be able to flee or fight or do whatever you need to in that moment to escape. The only thing is, because they're kids, a lot of times they're not able to escape these situations that are damaging to them. And so they're stuck in it. And so their body continuously releases these hormones that in turn have negative lasting consequences. I apologize if you can hear anything in the background. Apparently it's lawn day at my apartment complex. So if you ever can't hear me, please let me know and I can speak louder. So toxic stress, how that impacts the body is in really a lot of different ways. It increases blood pressure and cholesterol, which in turn can weaken the heart and circulatory system and leads to heart disease. Not only that, but these hormones increase glucose levels, which in turn increases cholesterol and increases the chance of developing type 2 diabetes. It can increase the risk of suicide as well because of various mental illnesses and things at play. I just wanted to point out that these are some of the top leading causes of death currently in America: is heart disease, type 2 diabetes, suicide. And so it's really kind of a public health crisis because they increase the chances of all these negative impacts on the body. Not only that, but it can impact the adrenal glands, which leads to a compromised immune system, as well as other chronic health issues. Besides like the physical impact on the body itself, these also have an impact on the developing brain, and it changes how our brains form. So it negatively impacts the areas in the brain in charge of things like impulse control, executive function, and fear response, because these hormones affect the prefrontal cortex, which is in charge of impulse control and executive function, and they impact the amygdala, which is in control of the fear response. So because these portions of our brain have been changed, this does a number on being able to learn and being able to have decision-making skills and the ability to pay attention in classes. So I know everybody here is a teacher. I just kind of want to get you guys thinking about this in context of the kids in your class, about how these kids in your class who have experienced higher rates of ACEs, how that negatively impacts their ability to learn in the classroom, and how that can go on to impact them for the rest of their life. As like we saw before, they have less of a chance to graduate from high school. They have more of a financial struggle. They struggle more with interpersonal issues, things like that. It negatively affects their ability to develop healthy coping skills. So it increases the chance of substance abuse occurring, where they turn to things like alcohol and drug use in order to cope with the negative mental impacts of continuously having trauma happen in their lives, which in turn negatively impacts their physical health again. It can increase the chances of other unhealthy coping mechanisms like unsafe sexual activity, which increases the chances of sexually transmitted infections and unintended pregnancies, as well as increasing the risk of mental illnesses like depression, anxiety, PTSD, which can overall affect their quality of life. And as we saw before, if they have children, having a struggle with mental illness in the home can contribute to being an ACE for these children. So we just see this continuous cycle that happens in every aspect because of the long-term effects that ACEs can have on an individual. The CDC has some other statistics. So the CDC talks about how preventing ACEs could reduce the number of adults with depression by as much as 44%, which I think is huge. Like, can you imagine if the number of adults with depression was decreased by 44%? Like, that's a huge, huge statistic, which affects so many different areas of life for them, for everybody around them, for their children, for them being able to get back to the community. It affects basically everything, as well as the CDC talks about how I mentioned before, at least 5 of the top leading causes of death are associated with ACEs. So if we're able to prevent ACEs from occurring in the first place, that can be something that affects everything that goes on in our community and in people's lives. And so that's why I really wanted to focus on is the importance of preventing ACEs, why it's important to prevent ACEs, how it can affect everything, as well as we will go in later into some protective factors against ACEs, because obviously you can't prevent every ACE from happening. It's just not a possibility in the world, sadly. But there are things that can negate the negative consequences of it and can help people to have a good long rest of their life with having a good quality of life and mental well-being. So that pulls us into the next slide of how can we prevent ACEs. So there are a lot of different things that we can do to prevent ACEs on an individual level and at a community level. So some of these include what we're doing right now, and that's raising awareness of ACEs and working to reduce the stigma of it. So if we are able to raise awareness around mental health challenges like depression, thoughts of suicide, substance abuse, as well as decrease the stigma around seeking help for parental challenges, then that can really help us to decrease the amount of ACEs and let people know that it is okay if you are struggling to seek out help. There's no shame in it. And like we said before, like these are people all around you, your friends, your family, members of the community. There's such a large proportion of people that have experienced ACEs. And so it's important to let everybody know that it is okay to seek help. Communities are huge in helping to prevent things like discrimination and poverty, which are other ACEs, as I mentioned before. These groups who are members of the minority, these groups who have low socioeconomic status and struggle financially, those are huge ACEs for them because they don't experience that sense of safety and belonging in their community and in their house. Having healthy and supportive relationships can also help to buffer the effects of ACEs. This is something that we'll go a little bit more into later on as well, which shows us that community support can be extremely helpful, because if you have a supportive community in a child's life, then that can be huge in negating any of the negative impacts that are happening in their household. So things like community centers, community parks, schools, those can be huge in decreasing the negative impacts that ACEs have on a child's life. Having high quality and easily accessible childcare, these can really work to help take the stress off of parents. It can help them to, if they need to go back to work, to help themselves financially, it can do that. It can help them to practice good self-care so that not only are they able to take care of themselves, but they're able to take care of their children too. Mentoring and after-school programs, I'm sure you guys have had experiences with that as teachers. Hopefully there are some programs in your school that can provide some extended education and support for students as well. Public education campaigns, I think a lot of times we see public education campaigns and it's like, oh, not another one. Like, I think it's easy to be like, oh, we have so many of these, like, these aren't going to be helpful, when in reality, these help to spread knowledge on things like suicide prevention, mental health, the dangers of drug use. And in my personal opinion, the more knowledge, the better. And so public education campaigns can be huge in helping people to reduce the stigma and know what to do if someone is having suicidal thoughts and struggles with their mental health or struggling with substance abuse. Being able to teach good socio-emotional and parenting skills is a big one. So teaching kids healthy relationship skills, teaching them emotional regulation, how to have a healthy relationship, healthy communication skills. These can really help to prevent ACEs as well, because like we said, it is a cycle. And if we teach parents as well, that can help to stop the cycle. If we teach parents good parenting skills, good emotional regulation skills, things like that, then this isn't just something that's going to impact one generation, it's going to impact all of the generations after as well. Family-centered treatment is another one that's good for substance abuse. Like we mentioned before, substance abuse in the home is a factor for ACEs and can have a negative impact on a family. And so if there's family-centered treatment for that, then that can help to build the relationship in the family and help to get rid of struggles with substance abuse. This is also another PowerPoint that I kind of wanted to open up for discussion and just ask you guys, how is this information beneficial to you? How can this information help you guys as teachers?
Well, I think it helps in programming. I'm an administrator, so I think about the things that are listed there that we can do for our school. The question is, like, how do we know that these things, like raising awareness and reducing the stigma, how do we know that that actually supports folks with ACEs?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And Freddie, if you wanted to jump in, help out with it as well.
Yeah, so many prevention programs will have an evaluation component to them. So you're looking at the impact in that particular context wherever the prevention program is provided. One of the challenges is that we as a nation do not tend to invest heavily in prevention programs and the assessment of prevention. But there are research articles around various different prevention programs. We do know about some of the more broader community services that will then reduce some of the negativity in those communities. So if we can support community development and communities that are healthy, then we have lower crime, we have better economic outcomes. And we can look at some of the other indicators in terms of students graduating from high school, reductions in teen pregnancy and teen parenting, and looking at interpersonal violent interactions between individuals. So we can look at those kinds of outcomes. And those are all indicators of ACEs. It's a long-term kind of evaluation, though. It's hard to do in one school year to be able to see the impact on those kinds of practices. So you really have to look over time, and that takes a fair amount of investment to do those kinds of studies. But they are available. So we didn't really focus on that kind of intervention today, but that's something that we can look at in the future to add to our repertoire of workshops.
So I can speak to my own personal experience as a school counselor at a high school. I'm an LMSW, so licensed master social worker who took a job as a school counselor. And in my individual work with students, in bringing them into my office, introducing them to the ACEs, assessment, letting them look at it, having conversations with them around it, explaining to them there's nothing wrong with you, you're not going crazy, this isn't your fault, this is something that happens to folks, here are some protective factors that are happening in your lives. And I personally have been tracking it in progress notes, things like that, and it's actually been a really effective tool when I'm working with individual students.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. I love how you mentioned too that it can be a tool for them, like you said, to let them know, like, hey, you're not crazy. This happens to other people. This is the reason behind this, as well as I love how you dug into like the protective factors as well, because I think going through like the first portion of the slideshow, it can be really challenging because you see the negative impacts that ACEs have. Even like putting the slideshow together myself, I was like, wow, this affects everything. Like, how do we challenge this? Like, it made me kind of feel a little bit hopeless a little bit. And so it's the next portion that we're going to be touching on in regards to protective factors and resilience in kids' life that I think really kind of give us hope for the future and for these kids, because it's not just immediately, oh, you have 4 more ACEs, this is what the rest of your life is going to look like. There's so much more at play. And I love that you express that with the students that you work with as well. So thank you for sharing that. And so that brings us to resilience.
Yeah, we're not all just one thing. We're not all just the negative impacts in our life. We develop skills, we learn how to cope, we have people in our lives that are helpful. So there's a lot of variables, a lot of things going on that make a difference as to how we cope with the ACEs. So even if someone has experienced 4 or 5 or 6 ACEs in their childhood, that doesn't mean that they aren't resilient. Maybe there are some people in their lives that have really stood up for them and advocated for them, and someone that they can really rely on. Maybe they just have a really strong personality and they're able to ask good questions and are able to take advantage of the resources that are available to them, however minimal that they might be. So there's a lot of variables that go into that. So one of those things is resilience, and resilience will, as we'll talk about, is something that actually, well, don't go too fast, slow down, go back, Kaylee. There we go. Stay there for a minute. So resilience is something that we can build and we can develop, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And how much resilience that you do have will impact how you cope with the number of ACEs that you have. And that ability to cope may help you to, in the long run, reduce the number of ACEs that you're experiencing. So it really can be a cyclical kind of thing. Okay, now you can go on to the next thing. Okay, oops. Nope, there we go.
Sorry,
Yourself.
that's my bad.
That's okay. Okay. So our level of adaptability helps us to respond to situations. We can dodge some challenges if we have that kind of level of flexibility and have some resources that are available to us. We can be good problem solvers. We can think about how do I deal with this? Maybe some students have someone in their life who's really taught them how to regulate their emotions, how to calm down in a stressful situation, how to recognize what's going on with their body and to be in tune with that. So having those kinds of skills. They may still have experienced bullying, or maybe they still experience some violence in their homes. But if they have been able to develop some of those other skills, they'll be better able to cope with those situations. They'll be better able to seek assistance and get the help that they need. It's probably, sometimes it might be an immediate kind of thing, but it's more likely that resilience is going to make a difference in the long run, in the long term, with what someone's experiencing in terms of ACEs. Lots of us have experienced trauma at different points in our life. And trauma exists on a continuum, and our ability to cope with that trauma is quite variable. And sometimes it depends on what's going on in our lives in that moment in time as to how well we are able to cope with trauma. At other times, you may be able to cope very well with it. And then something else, maybe it's just the last straw and you're having a hard time. So it's important to recognize those things and to understand the impact that trauma has on our lives in that moment and going forward. It's often a long-term response, something that we maybe have learned to cope with or to a way that we've managed to be able to move forward that may or may not be healthy. So some things to kind of keep in mind. Our social relationships are really important. I'm sure we all have people in our lives who build us up, who are really and truly supportive, people that we can really rely on. And there's probably a lot of other people in your life as well that maybe drain your energy. Maybe they're pretty needy. Maybe they're pretty demanding. And so being able to create some healthy boundaries for those relationships and recognize the difference. It's not just about having lots of people, but the quality of those relationships. How you engage with the world, how you see things, whether or not you have a more open and curious attitude, or whether or not you see things as the end of the world. So wherever you are on that spectrum, sometimes we can experience negative situations and we can go, that's kind of interesting. I wonder what's going on there. And we can be curious about that. And other times we can experience that, or other folks can experience the same thing and go, that is it. It is the end of the world. So we have to learn how to cope and to be able to know that we do have control over how we see things and that we can learn some skills to address that. And again, that's the coping strategies. There are lots of different ways to cope. Some work better for some people under some circumstances. So not everything works the same for everyone. So it's important to develop those coping strategies. And if you don't like the way that you're coping, if you don't feel like it's working, then it's time to try something else. And another thing that's often difficult for us to kind of wrap our brains around sometimes is that internal versus external locus of control. If we think that our lives are constantly directed by some exterior force, then it's hard to feel like you're very resilient, like you can do very much about it. But if you do recognize that I have control over how I respond to this situation, I have control over how I use my body, how I use my mind, the decisions that I make. I do have control over those things. I can make a huge difference. And again, that really relates to how we engage with the world and what our worldview is. So what we'd like to do is put you into a couple of breakout rooms, just small groups, so we can answer this question on here. Think about some people that you know. Maybe it's yourself, maybe it's a family member, maybe it's someone that you've worked with that you think has a high level of resiliency. You're just amazed at how they are able to cope, and talk about what are the unique qualities of that person. And before I do that, quickly, I'm going to check the chat because I saw a couple of things came in. Okay. All right, I'll have to respond to some of these. Maybe I'll have to follow up after our session or when we get to questions. All right, let's see, find my breakout rooms here. There we go. There we go. Yay.
Probably the most resilient person that I know. I know that's really like cocky and self-confident, but I feel like after the years that I've spent trying to heal and learn coping mechanisms, that I'm probably the most resilient person that I know. But what about you, Carrie?
You know, my mind immediately went to a handful of my students who blow my mind. I cannot believe how much I learned from them. It's such a joy and awesome privilege to work with them. So I have some kiddos whose ACEs scores are probably off the charts, right? And yet they continue to show up every day at school. They're passing classes. If they don't pass classes, they're recovering their credits one way or another. And I'm just absolutely amazed, just completely floored at what they can accomplish. And those protective factors are huge, right? So we talk a lot about how they need to look for healthy adults to connect to in their lives. Often what I see with some of these kiddos is they're pretty traumatized and tend to be attracted to other kids who are traumatized, right? And so that's not necessarily a bad thing per se, but it's really important for them to also have really healthy adults that they can connect to here in the school setting specifically, and then in their private lives. We talk about both. So yeah, these students, and I'm looking at their faces in my mind right now. Some that I've worked with for about 3 years, this group of them, and they're just lovely, lovely people.
I love that. Are you often their safe adult, or like do you encourage them finding like multiple safe adults at like
I, I, I am always so honored when they say that I am that person and terrified if I'm the only one. I think that the more the better when it comes to this. So we actively come up with lists of these people because if I'm not available, I'm working with 650 kids here at the high school. So if I'm not available, somebody else has got to be, right? And I want them to have a solid, at least 3 people bare minimum that they can seek out for help if they need it. So
I love that. I
yeah,
think that's great.
it's not about my ego. That's the important thing. Yeah.
I don't know if you saw the chat, but Carrie put it, or Haley put some things in the chat.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, she was saying that I would say both my parents have been very strong models for being a resilient human, considering their upbringing, and I'm grateful to have been taught skills and have a personality that is flexible and generally happy. And then she said, Carrie, I've seen that herd mentality of students who group with similar experiences. It's so important to make sure that they all have a solid, positive mentor.
Cool. Okay, thank you. I didn't realize that she could only respond by text. Okay, now I'm with everybody. I've got that box up. Okay.
Yeah, you're good.
Yeah.
We're trying to be flexible here, so.
Yeah, no, it's great. We're all very, very busy.
Yep, trying to cram it all in, so. Okay, I am gonna bring us all back, so I'm glad you got a chance to share. So excellent. So Kayla, you'll have to share your slides again.
Cool. Okay. Just 1 second. Awesome. I hope everybody had a good breakout group. Just real quick, I wanted to open it up. Did anybody have any experiences they wanted to share here? Understandable if not, as we just had a discussion with your group. I just thought I'd leave the chance for anybody to want to share. So we'll move on to the next slide. And that is how how can resilience be increased? So of course, we just went over a lot of the different factors of resilience, the different benefits of it. So now I wanted to go over different specifics of how we can increase resilience. This slide does give a kind of a general list of examples that we can use to increase resiliency, like having supportive and healthy social connections, helping others can help us feel empowered, structures like a daily routine, self-care, like Freddie said before, your locus of control, knowing what you have control over rather than what you don't, can be a huge one. Just your mindset and your view of the world, having a positive view of yourself, challenging any harmful self-narratives that come through your mind, anything that's negative about yourself and even about others, being able to challenge those and learning how to accept change and to adapt to it. Those are just, I think, some general principles that we have available. But what we wanted to do for this is break back up into discussion groups and have you guys go over some more specific examples of how we can increase resiliency. So yeah, Freddie, I don't know if you want me to try doing that. Oh, I think you're still muted.
Sorry, I'll take care of it. I'll just open up the same rooms.
Okay, sounds good.
So Haley can join. Haley, if you want to type something in, let us know. Mhm,
Gets to teach resilience.
mhm.
I envy that.
So what are some ways that you can help your students? Some specific things that you recommend to them.
Well, for me, we create a toolbox of resources. So we use the metaphor of either a tool belt, that they're carrying around tools in their tool belt, or a toolbox, and make a list of what those might be. And so it's those positive connections with healthy adults, good friends, supportive family members. But then, we talk about some of the real basics of self-care, prioritizing mental and physical health above all other things, right? That a student's number one job is to take care of their physical and mental health so that they can show up in other places. So talk a lot about those things.
So are there
Really
some
like that.
interesting things that your students share with you about how they engage in self-care?
Well, beyond the basics, we talk about how they've got to have priorities every day about sleep, eating, taking medication, getting medical care, stress management, those kinds of things. But I love the ways that they talk about how they're creating space and calming and soothing, whether out in nature or cuddling with animals or spending time with siblings. They come up with some of the coolest things: art, music, kinds of cool things. It's inspiring.
Are there clubs or groups at your school that are pretty active? Not just this, the typical sports and that sort of thing, but other kinds of groups that maybe are a bit more alternative or less mainstream, maybe.
Well, yes and no. There's a lot of work for that. There's a lot of opportunity for that, but we're in Teton Valley, and so we're lucky that kids have a lot of this outside of school. So they're skiing or they're hiking or, snowmobiling or farming. There's a lot of connection to nature here.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm looking at what Haley said.
Yeah, same.
I'm so curious about what ecotherapy is and like what that looks like.
Mm.
So I think that's like using nature and I think it's a pretty common Japanese kind of approach to well-being and self-care, being out in nature and there are some areas like with special parks that are really meant for mental health.
The concept of forest bathing, I think,
Yeah.
comes from that philosophy. It's such a
Exactly.
beautiful idea to go and
Yeah.
sit and immerse oneself in the five senses, the touch, the feel, the taste, the sound, right? Like it's cool.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Our environment makes such a huge difference in our lives.
Mhm.
Really does. Especially, I feel very privileged. We were talking about this in one of my cclasses the other day, where we were talking about how important nature and the ecosystem is to us. But then we had to like sit down and acknowledge that like the majority of us live in Idaho, where that is a very readily accessible thing that we have access to, whereas if people who live in more urban areas don't really have easy access to nature. And so I was just thinking about how awesome it is that that is something that we really can easily like slot into a lot of our techniques with kids and with other people.
And that's one of the reasons that parks are so important, because it does give you that alternative, especially if you're in an urban environment, that just having that opportunity to play and be outside.
I will say too, we have a huge ELL population. We're at about 40% in our school district now here in Teton County, Idaho, and tapping into the rich cultural resources that they bring with them is such a pleasure to watch. There's a lot of cool cultural stuff that happens within that community as well. So
Nice.
yeah.
Excellent. And really, really affirming to be able to honor that.
Yeah, sense of community. Haley, you're at 55. That's amazing.
Yeah, that's really
Yeah.
important.
There's a lot of strength there and resiliency found in there too.
Absolutely. Okay, I'm gonna bring us back.
Okay, and then I can share my screen with everyone again. Okay, so if anybody in the small groups wanted to pop in and say what they talked about real quick, now's the opportunity. If not, then I have some examples that I can include. Well, so I know from my group, both Scott and Trenton talked about this exercise that they would utilize with for like the teachers and with their students, where it was like a circle exercise. You guys can jump in and tell me if I'm getting any portion of this wrong. But you would kind of basically like write down items, and then you'd have different circles of like what's in my control, what's not in my control. And you can put the notes, you can write some down on a note and be like, hey, this isn't in my control, and put that in that area. This is in my control, put that in that area. And so I thought that was like a really good exercise to utilize, because as we saw before, kind of like what Freddie was talking about, knowing what's in our control can really help us to develop good resiliency. So I thought that was great input. Some other examples that we have is joining a gaming club can help to increase a good social connection in schools. Volunteering at an animal shelter can help people. Like the slide says, we can feel empowered by helping others. And so that's one exercise that we could do. Going to bed at the same time every night, getting that sort of schedule in can be beneficial. Meditation and writing in a journal every day can be a good schedule to have that can impact you in a positive way, making healthy food choices, meeting with a counselor, and choosing to not be a victim in some situations and letting disappointments go. Those are all different examples of ways that we can increase our own resiliency. And then I'll turn this slide over to Freddie.
All right, thanks. So many of the things that are really going to promote resilience are really protective factors. So some students may have developed these protective factors at a young age, or they're in families where these kinds of protective factors already exist. So it's being able to build on those and recognize their importance. As we talked a little bit about, I think sometimes we forget the power and the importance of community resources and interventions, whether that's having enough mental health providers in your community or having opportunities to engage with others in positive social activities, having appropriate parks with equipment and games or activities where kids and adults can interact together in healthy and active kinds of ways. Having effective schools, having enough resources in our schools to make sure that students that need extra help can get that, and that we have classroom sizes that are not overwhelming to our teachers, and that can help students make good connections with other students, and that we can attend to the needs of individual students and to connect with their parents and their families. Being able to teach coping skills. I know that there's a lot of different ways that people cope, but sometimes people choose ways that are not very healthy, that may be damaging to them. And really, they're just trying to cope with whatever challenges, whatever adverse experiences that they're encountering. So helping people to learn how to cope, some of the things that we talked about, that you talked about in your groups, and having those kinds of activities, learning how to meditate or to take deep breaths or to use a journal, how to be able to let things go and not let them eat at you. Having a supportive adult in a child's life, I can't say enough about how important that is. Doesn't necessarily have to be a parent, could be an aunt, an uncle, an older sibling, a family friend, a teacher, a pastor, a counselor, but someone that they can really count on. Maybe it's a mentor. Mentoring programs can be really helpful, but having that person that they can really rely on, that's really consistent in their life and that's very supportive, is really, really important. And then having counseling services available. And that's a challenge that we have here in Idaho. We don't have enough mental health providers to meet the need. And that's part of my little project here. What we're trying to do is increase that availability. But sometimes we just need a little professional help to get over the humps, to deal with some difficult situations. And we need to have those resources available and have access to them. I think I just kind of want to throw this out to the group. So since you're all from education, I wonder if you could, in terms of protective factors and resilience, what would a really supportive, good school look like? What would be the resources that would be available that would really promote protective factors and help kids that are coping with adverse childhood experiences? What do you think would be some of the elements that need to be there? And maybe, I'm sure many of those elements already exist, but what are some things how would that look? If you could wave your magic wand.
If I could wave my magic wand, I wouldn't have the schools being the place that we fix everything. But definitely providing, I think, the student to teacher ratio, or flipping the script in a classroom or school where it's very student centered instead of classroom centered. And that's what I'm trying to do with the school that I run, but it's super difficult. So
Thanks. Thank you.
I stepped outside so I can participate for a second. I'm Haley, and if I could wave my magic wand, I would love to see that the kids could be involved with the parental support, because I feel like in our community in American Falls, there are a lot of measures that we're trying to take to increase parental involvement. But once you get up into the high school level, it's like parents think that their kids need to be more independent, but in reality, that's like your last ditch effort to hold on to your kid and make your kid a good human. And at this age group, I don't know if it's just this generation or maybe it's particular to American Falls, but the apathy and the lack of desire to get involved is so strong that programs have a hard time surviving. And I think if the kids would get over themselves and have a little bit of support at home and a little bit of support from trusted mentors at school.
Did we lose Haley? Oh, there we go. Anybody else? What's your ideas if you could wave your magic
I don't
wand?
know.
You're breaking up a
I'm
little
so
bit.
sorry. I'm in Marsh Valley. I have
That's okay.
Marsh Valley service. Sorry, guys.
We're used to it. I've been doing this for what now? 3 years? So I'm used to the technical difficulties. Okay. We need to think about our protective factors in terms of the systems that we all interact with, and making sure that those different systems and different system levels are actually protective and promoting the best options that we have for our kids. Okay, I think we're ready to go, Kaylee.
Awesome. Did you want me to just go on to the next slide,
Yeah,
or should I
I
share?
think we're good.
Awesome. Okay, so this is one of my favorite infographics that I have found on ACEs, because I think it really shows the impact that even one person can have on someone who's experienced a significant amount of ACEs. So I really like the portion of it that says a person with an ACE score of 4 who had no, they call it protective and compensatory experiences, PACEs. It says a person with an ACE score of 4 who had no PACEs may have had a very different outcome from someone with an ACE score of 4 who had a loving grandmother, teacher, or coach. So it really shows, like Freddie was talking about earlier, quality over quantity. Even if someone has a quantity of unhealthy relationships, that's not going to help them as much as even one supportive figure in their life. I guess you guys can think of that in your context as well, even if you're a counselor in a school, if you're a teacher in a school, even if like whatever role you play in a child's life, as long as you're supportive of them, then that can help to be a mitigating factor for them. There are other things as well, like having at least one best friend, employing mindfulness, meditation, exercise, and physical activity. That kind of goes into the clubs that we're talking about, after school clubs and programs that could be available, hobbies and clubs, and a school that provides resources, as we were talking about before, that can be a huge protective factor in these kids' lives. So I just wanted to really touch on that you can make a difference 110%. And I think it shows that you guys are here, that you care, and you 110% have the ability to be a supportive figure in your students' lives. So next up, we have the effects of protective factors. This really dives into specifics a little bit more on how protective factors can impact a child. So there is a study done, and I have like a list of references if you guys want access to them. These different studies, I can give them to you. But this study, they found that supportive friendships and relationships with family help to mediate the effects of ACEs on mental health. So if there is a higher level of family support, and they found a correlation between that and a lower likelihood of developing anxiety disorders. And even friend support, they found, led to lower levels of mood disorders. So being able to decrease the levels of these disorders can help someone with their quality of life, and in turn help their children and all of the people that come after them. So next up,
I just want to kind of reiterate that, especially in terms of mental health. And I just came from a presentation this morning before this on mental health and suicide prevention. And I think if we have those people in our lives that really give us the message that we're important, that we matter, and that we belong, then we're less likely to see people feeling despair and hopeless and not feeling like they belong or connected and choosing suicide. So I think it's a really important element that we provide, just that connection, that making those connections between people.
yeah, absolutely. I love that. Thank you for jumping in on that, Freddie. Supportive relationships definitely have a great impact on people in many different areas of life. So next up, we wanted to have you guys take this assessment. I can copy the link and paste it in the chat and just give you guys a little bit of time to go over this ACEs score yourself. Let's see. Oh, that's not it. Chat. Okay. With this link, I think there are a few pages, so you'll click on it and then you'll just like scroll down a page or two. And I think it's on the third page. And then I'll just have you put in a number for each segment on whether you've experienced it or not. And then it comes up with your ACE score. It's basically each of these questions that you say yes to adds one number to your ACE score. So I'll give you guys just a bit of time to fill that out. How's everyone feeling? Do we need a couple more minutes?
Put everyone back into the breakout room for just a couple minutes. So if you can talk about your ACE score if you want to, or thinking about why it would be important to have some awareness about this.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Postpartum depression, which impacted me a little bit.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier that you have been on a healing journey, and I wonder what self-protective factors you have at play there.
Oh, that's a good question. Um, dang. I feel like even though there was some contention in my household, my dad has been always there to support me, and I've had great, good friends for a long period of time. And I always had access to mental health services and counseling. I've been in counseling for around 10 years now, not an insignificant portion of time. And so I feel like those factors have really been super protective for me.
Beautiful. You're a living testament to the power of those.
Yes.
I love it. Well, I was shocked.
Sorry, you guys, I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
What is our question that we're chiming in on?
Freddie, you're muted.
If there's anything you
What
want
was
to, and if there's anything you want to share about your score on the ACEs, or just kind of why this is important to have awareness about.
okay? I gonna stop my video just because I'm worried that will take up bandwidth, but hopefully we'll have audio. Um, I really think it's important for people to, like, for students, especially, to understand their ACE scores as a young kid, because then they can take the measures that they need to counteract those. And so I think the younger that they find out about them and realize that they're not the problem, then they can figure out ways to cope and kind of ground themselves to be able to be successful individuals in their future.
Absolutely. Nice. I think then you can, you know, it's not just me, and you can take some steps to move forward. You can be intentional about overcoming those experiences. Okay. Anybody else want to add anything?
I do want to say I agree with you, Freddie, that I think that the numbers are so much higher of folks who have higher ACE scores. I know this study was done on pretty well resourced, privileged populations. And so I would be interested to see it redone at some point. That'd be pretty cool.
Yeah. I think sometimes it's difficult to do those kinds of studies, especially in very high risk, high needs areas, because people are a little skeptical of those kinds of big research studies, and maybe a little threatened by that, which we haven't always done a very good job of being very ethical in those situations. So it's understandable and it makes sense.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's and in some ways it's like, okay, we do know enough. So now we can start dealing with the issues. So, all right, good point.
Okay. Let me share my screen again. Okay, so we just wanted to open up this last little portion of time for any questions and comments. If you guys had any discussions in your group that you really liked that you wanted to share, any thoughts about your ACEs score, why it's important for us to know our ACEs, things like that. So I think my group, we were all a little surprised at the different ACEs that were on there. I don't think you really start to think about our personal experiences with it until you take the test and then you add up the score and it's like, oh, some of these resonate with me. As well as looking at the high rates of other people who have experienced ACEs, I think can be really shocking as well. And so for me personally, I think the importance of looking back over like my ACE score and why I think it's important to look at your ACE is to be able to analyze what has impacted you in your childhood that still impacts you today. And I think it can give you some empathy for other people who have experienced a high rates of ACEs as well, for the students that you're working with, being able to have an understanding of how this affects them in many different ways in their education and their relationships, different things like that is, in my opinion, really important to look at. And I think being able to look back on our past experiences helps us to know if we need to reach out for support too. Because I think, kind of like what Carrie was saying, you can look at your score, and you can understand you're not crazy, because other people with high rates of ACEs have high rates of other things like mental illness and things. And it's 110% okay if you need to seek help, and that's not something that should be stigmatized or you should be looked down upon because of. Any comments, any questions or anything?
Kaylee, I love that you just pointed out that our own personal experiences can lead us to empathy when working with our students. I think that's lovely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Years ago, I worked on a study with Early Head Start, wanting to look at the attachment schema of the home visitors that were helping the moms with new babies, and they didn't want to participate. They didn't want to know their own attachment schema, and many of them had experienced adverse childhood experiences. and I think they were concerned about being triggered by taking a deep dive into their own attachment schema. So we have to be aware of our own experiences and how that impacts the work that we do. So we have our little homework prompt for you there. So if you want to doesn't have to be anything that's very long, but just take some time to reflect and write about that. And then you can just send that as a PDF to the email there, to our include email. And that will be part of the credit for the workshop. We have about a minute. Any last comments, questions? And if you do, oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I'm going to post a link in the chat to a survey. If you have a quick little 3 minutes and you want to take that, that would be super helpful for us.
Thanks, Lucy.
Thank you, Lucy. I did also want to mention, I think sometimes it can be really difficult to take the ACEs test and to see what your score is. I think, like I mentioned before, it can be really shocking and can bring up some memories and some feelings. And so I wanted to let all of you know, of course, throughout this, we're kind of talking about it in the context of students. But I think it's also important for you guys to engage in self-care. And if taking this test brought up any feelings, anything you need to talk about, it is okay to reach out to somebody supportive in your life. It is a-okay to reach out for counseling, things like that. So you guys, self-care is important. You can't take care of others if you don't take care of yourself too.
And you can reach out to us as well. We're here to be helpful. So if you have some questions, don't hesitate to contact me in the meantime, and we'll see what we can do. Well, I look forward to seeing you all in a couple of weeks. The next one is on awareness and self-regulation. So we'll talk a little bit about that, and I think that will hopefully provide some good skills that you can also share with your students and with your colleagues. So I'll just leave this up for a little bit to make sure everybody gets a chance to give us some feedback on our little survey. And thank you all, and I'll see you in a couple of weeks. Kayla, you can stop sharing your screen if you want to. Hopefully everyone has that.
You did really good, Kaylee.
Thank you. Thank you for posting the survey in the chat, by the way. I had that in my notes and I didn't have the notes up. And so I appreciate you remembering.
You're good. I wanted to be involved and I wanted to take responsibility for that. So I will see you guys at the meeting in a couple of minutes.
Sounds good. See you soon. Well, thank you for your help too, Freddie. I appreciate it. I'm just looking back at the comments. Oh, I think you're still muted.
And I think that's everybody. Okay. Oh, do you want me to print them out or something?
We could, yeah.
All right, let's see, go to chat. Format, no, let's see. Save chat, there we go. I don't know where it went, but I'll find it.
I realized Scott Corgatelli, a teacher that was here, was my 6th grade teacher.
Oh, cool. That's very cool.
Yeah.
All right. So he
like,
can see what a great job he did.
Yeah, exactly. I even, like told him too, because I just remember him being such a great teacher, and he would like show us these songs on like bullying and really focus on like mental health in class. And so I even was like, "Did you used to teach at Hawthorne?" It's like, "You were my teacher. You did a great job." So
Oh, good.
and
Oh,
again,
that's nice. Perfect. Okay. I'm gonna see if I can take a break before the next thing.
sounds good.
All right. I saved it. I don't know where it went, but I'll find it. So probably my desktop. Who knows?
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
I'm gonna end it.